The best way to judge your productivity is by looking at the output you're able to create and the progress that you make towards your targets. Yet every week I speak to CEOs and business leaders who, despite being busy, look back and they don't actually know what they did. And this is a huge problem because when you're building and scaling a company, it's so easy to get stuck in the weeds where you pulled into fires and everyday tasks that simply aren't a good use of your time. That's why in this video, I'm going to take you through a simple productivity system that I've helped CEOs in over 18 countries to implement to really help them take control of their days. And by the end of this, you're going to know exactly what you need to focus on and prioritize, how to effectively manage your workload, and also how to structure your days to maximize what you get done. If you're new here, though, my name's Byron Morrison. I'm the author of The Effective CEO 2.0. And if you want to dive further into what I'm talking you through in this video, then you can get a copy of my book in the description below. So before we can look at how to plan your days and structure your time, though, the first thing you need to figure out is what you should actually be doing. The way that I always advise people to do this is to set aside a morning where you map out your next 90 days. Really think about what goals are you trying to achieve? What projects do you need to move forward? What are your biggest priorities? And what challenges are you going through right now that you need to resolve? Because at the end of the day, if you don't have a target to aim for, you're gonna miss. And we can use the insights that you gain through doing this step to really guide your focus on the things you need to get done. Because when you're clear on what you want to do on a macro level, the next step from there is to break it down further and really think about, okay, based on where I want to get to, what are my biggest priorities? What are the tasks that I need to accomplish? What do I need to be doing every week to move closer to my goals? And then from there, what state of mind do I need to be in to do these effectively? I want to talk you through a real world example of this to see it in context, and then I'll show you how to determine this for yourself. So, a few years ago, I was working with a CEO who came to me during an explosive period of growth. And at the time, he had so much on his plate that he was feeling stretched thin and overwhelmed by everything he needed to get done. And when I looked at how he was approaching his days, he'd follow the standard productivity advice. He'd create a to do list, figure out the important things he needed to get done, and then he'd dive in and attack the day. And on paper, this made perfect sense because why wouldn't you figure out your priorities and then set aside time for them? Well, while practices like this may work for your average person, they can be catastrophic for someone who's trying to grow and scale a business. The reason being is that to-do list is often short-sighted. It's focused on what's important right now without really factoring in what's important long-term. And that was exactly what was happening with that client because at the time, his biggest focus needed to be on fundraising and securing investment so that they could continue to grow and scale the business. But because of how he was approaching his days, most of his time was being spent on putting out fires and solving operational issues, meaning that by 3 p.m., if he was lucky, he could then get an hour to focus on his high value work. Only then he was mentally exhausted, meaning he didn't have the energy and focus needed to do these tasks effectively. This is why we needed to completely restructure his days and build it out in a way that was highly defensive for the tasks that he needed to get done. For him, that meant that we blocked off 9 until 12 every single morning where he focused on these high value tasks. He'd then take a break, have some lunch, and only then would he come back and dive into that to-do list. By having this foresight, this is how he could then really defend his time to make sure that he was getting his key tasks done. So going back to you, I want you to think about, okay, if this is where I want to be in 90 days, these are our goals and our targets and objectives. What are the high leverage tasks that I need to be focusing on? What are the things that I need to be moving forward every single day and week that are going to get us clearer to our goals? And I want you to think about realistically, how much time do you need to be putting into these every single week? Is it 5 hours? Is it 10? 20? That's going to give you a better idea of how much time you need to be allocating for these top level tasks. And then also think about what is the energy and state of mind that you need to be to perform these at your best. Because what I found for most people is they perform best first thing in the morning. That's when they're energized, they're focused, and in a state of flow, which is why we have to be highly defensive to block off this time for that high value work. With that being said, though, everyone is different. Some people are more focused in the afternoon or at night. So I really want you to think about when do you perform at your best? And that's going to give you a better idea about when you need to defend that time for the things that you need to get done. Okay, so you know your top level targets, you know your high leverage tasks, and you know how much time you need to be spending on them in order to make them happen. The next thing we need to look at is where you've been spending your time. To do that, we're going to be doing a time audit where you're first going to look at the past and then the future to give you a better idea of how you've been spending your days. To do the past audit, I want you to reflect on your last 2 to 4 weeks. Go back through your diary, your schedule, your emails, the projects you worked on, the events you attended, really to get a better idea of where you spent your time. And then go through these items one at a time and ask yourself honestly, was this a good use of your time? Was this an action that got you closer towards your goals or targets? And could this have been done by someone else? People make a to do list all of the time of the things they need to get done. But what I want you to do instead is to make what I call a not to do list, the things that you're going to commit to no longer doing going forward. The reason this past audit is so important is I find that a lot of people allow their days to get consumed by tasks and meetings and commitments that simply aren't a good use of their time. Not only that, there may have been something that was part of your role and really important a year ago, yet now it's no longer something you should be involved in, but you're just attending because you don't stop to question whether or not you actually should or need to. This is why by sitting down and reflecting on what you've actually been doing, you can get a much better idea of the things that you need to commit to no longer taking on going forward. So set aside some time to reflect on the last 2 to 4 weeks to figure out what you need to remove yourself from in the future. I always find that whenever I go through this with private clients, they're able to reclaim hours every single week just by figuring out the things that they need to stop doing. So that's step one in this, audit the past. The next step is then to audit the future and the things you're about to take on. What I want you to do is to create a to-do list of everything that you need to get done, and then looking at through the lens of your 90-day goals, your high leverage tasks, the things that are actually going to get you to where you want to be. I want you to go through it point by point and be brutally honest with yourself. Is getting this done going to get you closer to your goals and targets? If the answer is no, then you need to delete it or remove it because it's simply not a good use of your time and energy. The next question you need to ask yourself is, does this need to be done by you? Because the reality is, when you're growing a business, everything you do has a cost. Every hour you spend in one thing is an hour that could be spent in something else. And not only that, you only have so much energy and bandwidth, meaning you're either going to be able to do a few things really well or many things mediocre or badly. This is why if you want to be highly effective in your role, you need to get really defensive with your time, energy, and bandwidth. That means wherever possible, delegating and letting go everything that could be done by someone else. That's why this future audit is a great time to really sense check what you're taking on. So really think about, do you actually need to do this, or could you delegate it and hand it off to someone else? By going through this future audit, it's going to help you reduce your to-do list and get you clear on your key priorities and the things you need to get done. Not only that, I see often with private clients that they'll come to me feeling overwhelmed by everything that they've got going on. And by us going through these audits, they'll be able to see that a lot of the tasks on their plate either aren't important or could be done by someone else. So by going through this process of elimination, it reduces a lot of anxiety and stress that they would have been going through trying to take on everything themselves. That's why I really want to encourage you to make this a non-negotiable part of your week. But before you go into planning, go through everything that you're taking on. Really think about, is this actually important? Could this be done by someone else? Is this a good use of your time? Also look through your meetings and your calendar. Think about, do you need to be part of this conversation? Is this something that you can actually add value to, or should you remove yourself? Doing this every single week can free up hours, which is then time you can put into things that are actually going to get you to where you want to be. The next step in all of this is putting it all together and starting to plan and structure your times. To talk you through all of this, I'm going to share a screenshot of an average week scheduler that's taken from my digital planner that comes as a free bonus with my Effective CEO 2.0 book. You can grab that using the link in the description of this video, or feel free to map this out yourself or do it in whatever you like to use to structure your time. But ideally, you want to begin by firstly looking at what an average week looks like before you add anything else in. Now, if you're anything like the clients that I work with, one of your biggest challenges is probably finding balance or making time for the areas of your life outside of your career or business that are actually important. And I get it, when you're busy, it can feel like this internal tug of war where something always has to give, and it's usually the things that matter most. The mistake I see a lot of people making, though, is they're not being highly intentional with the things that they want to commit to and take on. Because if you don't plan it, you're not going to stick to it. That's why I always advise starting to build your schedule around the things that truly matter. Start with as blank a calendar as possible and really think about what are the ideal life commitments that you need to stick to. Time to work out, date night, time for your hobbies, whatever else is important to you. By scheduling it first, it then makes it easier to plan everything else around that. The next thing we need to do is schedule time for your high value zone of genius work. In step 1 and 2, I talked to you about getting clear on your 90-day goals and targets, along with the tasks that you need to achieve in order to make them happen. Well, you now need to allocate time that you can defend to make sure that they're getting done. I gave you the example before about the client who was going through a period of fundraising, and we figured out that he needed 15 hours every single week in order to do this effectively. We also realized that he needed to be energized and in a state of flow, which was best first thing in the morning. So for him, he blocked off 9 until 12 every single day to focus on these tasks. Now, that was him. So I want you to think about what needs to be in place for you. How much time do you need allocated for these tasks every single week? When do you perform at your best? Knowing that, where do you need to structure this into your schedule so that you can make sure that you're defending that time? Once you've done that, the next thing you need to structure in is your regular reoccurring tasks. So this could be anything from regular meetings to events you attend or any other commitments that you've got on a regular basis. The benefit of having this average week mapped out is you can then step back and objectively look at how much time you have and what your availability is like, which you can then use to make more informed choices to manage your workload and what you actually take on. A CEO I used to work with was absolutely terrible about this when we first met. I started looking at how he was approaching his weeks, and at the beginning of the week, he had this huge to do list of everything he needed to get done. Inevitably, what would happen by Friday, though, is if he was lucky, he'd maybe get through half of it. He'd then go into this continuous spiral where he'd beat himself up, saying to himself he wasn't being productive enough or getting enough done. In reality, though, he only had about 10 hours a week to focus on high value work, and he was overloading himself with a to-do list that needed like 20 to 30 hours to get it all done. It was no wonder that he was overwhelmed and always feeling like he was behind. By recognizing this up front, though, he could then be far more realistic with what he was committed to. He could then delegate accordingly, push back on deadlines, and really make sure he was taking on stuff that he could actually achieve. Not only did this allow him to feel more in control, it also reduced a lot of the frustrations in his team who were getting annoyed with the fact that he commit to something and then miss deadlines or not get something done in time. And that's why it's so important that you look in advance how much availability and capacity you actually have. One thing you may notice by looking at this average week is you're going to have some days that are busier than others. Let me give you another example. There was a CEO that I worked with who, when we structured his days and weeks, his Mondays were pretty much taken up by back-to-back meetings. What he'd still been doing, though, is he still had a to-do list of everything else he wanted to get done. He never got round to it, and then he'd beat himself up that he wasn't being productive enough. What I had to point out to him was he was setting himself up to fail with these unrealistic expectations. And one of the biggest mistakes he was making is he was judging his productivity based on that day in isolation instead of what he got done over the course of a week. And this is why when you're looking at how you're structuring your days and weeks, I also want you to consider that there are two different types of days that you're likely to have. The first is what I call efficient days. These are the days where you have meetings, you're setting your team up for success, you're dealing with operational issues, and you're primarily working in the business, making sure that everything's running smoothly. The second is what I call effective days. This is where you're working on the business, you're driving your high value tasks forward, you're doing the things that get you closer towards your goals. What I find is that for most people who are feeling overwhelmed and stuck in the weeds, is they're having far too many efficient days and not enough effective days. This is why, despite being busy, they don't actually feel like they're moving anything forward. That's why if you want to be really effective in your role, you need to have a balance of both. With that being said, it's not always going to be a clear cut, this is an efficient day, this is an effective day, and sometimes you may split them in half. Regardless, when it comes to looking at your average week as well as planning what you're going to do next, make sure you look at it through the lens where you've got a balance of both efficient and effective so that you can ensure that you're making the best use of your time. From there, the next step in this is planning your week. When you do this is going to be completely up to you. I find that some people like doing this on a Sunday when they can slow down and think without the busyness of the week. Some people like doing it first thing on a Monday morning where they can set their intentions for what they're taking on. Other people like doing it on a Friday afternoon as a great way to round out the week. It really doesn't matter. What matters is when you can stick to and actually committing to getting it done. So the way that you want to approach this is set aside 15 to 20 minutes where you're going to sit down and get really clear on what you're taking on. The first thing you want to do is audit your upcoming week. Looking through your diary and your schedule, go through everything from your meetings to events you're attending or other commitments that you've got scheduled in, and be brutally honest with yourself. Is this a good use of your time? Is getting this done going to get you closer to your goals and targets? Could this be done by someone else, or is this simply a waste of your time? By figuring out in advance what you're going to be attending and what you need to remove yourself from, that's then going to allow you to delete it from your diary, which then gives you the time back to allocate to something else. Not only that, it also helps you avoid being that person who cancels something at the last minute because you ran out of time. Or even worse, you're attending something out of obligation because it's in your diary and you don't want to mess people around. That's why it's so important to take the time in advance to really look at what you've got scheduled in and if it's a good use of your time. From there, you then need to get clear on your priorities and the things you need to get done. One of my favorite ways to do that is to reverse engineer the week, looking at your 90-day goals and targets, the projects you're working on, and the things you need to get done. Ask yourself, fast forward to 5 p.m. Friday afternoon, what would I need to get done for this week to be a success? That's going to help you get really clear on the tasks and objectives that you need to move forward. This is going to allow you to make that to-do list of all of the things that need to get done. Again, though, before just scheduling them in, you then need to audit them, going through them point by point and asking yourself, is this actually important? Is getting this done going to get us closer to our 90-day goals and targets? If the answer is yes, then does this need to be done by you? If the answer is no, you can then look now what you need to delegate and let go of to free you up to do the things that only you can do. Once you've reduced your to-do list, you can then go through each of these items and really think about how much time do you need to get them done? What sort of headspace and energy do you need to be in to do them effectively? And then you can allocate time for them accordingly. This audit is going to be one of the most important things that you do every single week because it's going to determine whether you go into the week feeling stretched thin and overwhelmed and taking on tasks that aren't a good use of your time, and you going in clear on what you need to focus on and prioritize and really defending your time accordingly. Because once you've reduced that to-do list, then you can go through it and really think about, okay, how much time do you need for these tasks? What energy and bandwidth do you need available to execute on them effectively? And then you can start to schedule and allocate time to them accordingly. The final thing you need to do when planning your week is to sense check how you feel. Because once you've got your to-do list, you've mapped out your time and you've figured out your key priorities, if you're looking at that and you're already feeling anxious and overwhelmed and like you're behind, then that's a red flag that you've taken on far too much and you've overloaded yourself. Because if that's happening, then it means that you need to slow down. You really need to figure out what you need to push back on. Maybe there's deadlines you need to change. Maybe there's tasks that you need to delegate and get off your plate. Either way, you need to figure this out now, because if you don't, you're going to go into the week rushing around and you're not going to be effectively using your time. If, however, you look at it and it feels manageable and you feel like you're in control, then that's a sign that you've properly prepared yourself for the week ahead. The next step from there is then planning your days. A lot can change day to day, and that's why I really advise taking a few minutes in the morning to really figure out where you're going to be spending your time. Because one of the biggest mistakes I see people making, especially when they're incredibly busy, is them convincing themselves that they've got so much on that they just need to dive in and attack the day. The problem with this approach, though, is they become highly reactive. Life just starts happening to them, or they dive into tasks that seem important in the moment without really considering where they're spending their time. And that's why I really want to challenge you to think, if you're about to work an 8 or a 10-hour day, do you really not have 15 minutes to figure out where you're going to be spending that time? And that's why it's so important that you slow down at the beginning of the day to really set yourself up for success. Have a look through your diary and look at what meetings you've got coming up. Revisit your weekly plan and your tasks and objectives and the things you need to get done. Have a look at where you have available time. This is going to allow you to proactively really preempt the day and what you're about to face. Also, one of my favorite things to do again is to reverse engineer the day. Think ahead to whatever time you want to finish and ask yourself, what do I need to move forward or get done today for today to be a success? That again is going to allow you to align your priorities and the things that you need to move forward. Not only that, it can also allow you to take a huge amount of pressure off yourself, because one thing I find with high achievers is they always go into this mentality where they feel like they should be doing more, or they've reached the end of the day and they beat themselves up feeling like they haven't done enough. By thinking ahead at the beginning of the day what you want to get done, it then makes it easier for you to be at peace with the things that you actually did. By looking at your availability up front, it'll also then make it a lot easier for you to defend your time, because let's say a member of your team comes to you and says, have you got a few minutes to help me with this problem? Rather than you dropping what you're doing, you can then push back and say, no, but I have time at 2 p.m. Come back then. This is going to make it a lot easier for you to stick to the things that you need to do. The way I want you to think about it is you setting yourself up for the day ahead is much like an elite athlete stepping up to the plate. They don't just swing, hit the ball, and hope for the best. Instead, they slow down, they play it out in their mind, they do that practice swing to really figure out how they're going to approach it. And if you want to maximize what you get done, you need to approach it in exactly the same way. Set aside that 10-15 minutes in the morning to go through your day, and it can transform what you get done, and also make sure you're not being pulled into things that aren't a good use of your time. Everything I've shared with you in this video is going to allow you to really take back control of your days and maximize what you get done. But ultimately, what's going to make or break your success here is your ability to follow through. Because time and time again, I see people who go into the day filled with the best intentions. They create a plan, they figure out their priorities and what they need to get done, but then they allow themselves to get derailed. They get pulled into problems that aren't a good use of their time. They focus on busy work that they shouldn't be doing, or they allow themselves to get distracted. And that's why if you really want to maximize your productivity and what you take on, you need to figure out the things that cause you to get in your own way. You need to effectively delegate and let go of tasks. You need to set boundaries and defend your time. And you need to make sure that you're prioritizing the things that you need to do. This is what's ultimately going to make the difference between you being able to reach your goals and targets and moving forward the things you need to do, and you're being pulled back into the weeds and being stuck working in the business instead of driving growth. Now, my channel's filled with videos that are going to help you deal with all of that and really show you how to take control and become more effective in your role. But if you want to dive deeper into what I've spoken to you about in this video, you may also want to check out my book, The Effective CEO 2.0. Inside, I'm going to help you clearly define your role and responsibilities and also figure out what you need to be prioritizing to drive your business forward. I then talk you through delegation mindset, how to clearly communicate expectations and keep people accountable to ensure they follow through. I then also talk you through how to structure your days, weeks, and months to manage your workload and maximize what you get done. And I go through the biggest challenges that get in the way and stop you from executing on your role, like running more effective meetings, getting people to solve their own problems, dealing with procrastination, overwhelm, and more. So if you want to find out more about that book and grab a copy, you can do so using the link in the description of this video. So there you have it, a simple productivity system that you can use to take control of your days and maximize what you get done. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like. And if you have any questions, leave them in the comments below and I'll personally get back to you and give you some tailored guidance and advice. If you want more videos on taking control and becoming more effective in your role, then make sure you hit the subscribe button. I've been Byron Morrison. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.